Good afternoon. My audio okay? Can people hear me? Good. Welcome to the State Energy Planning Board meeting. I'm Doreen Harris, President and CEO of NYSERDA and Chair of the State Energy Planning Board. As a reminder, today's meeting is open to the public to observe both in person here in Albany and on our live stream. Thank you to everyone who is here with us today and to those tuned in online. Before turning to our agenda, I'd like to welcome the members of the State Energy Planning Board and their designees. I'll ask that each board member or delegate introduce themselves by sharing their name, title, and agency. Elizabeth, why don't we start with her? Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Walters, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Ag and Markets.
Vincent Ravishir, designee for Commissioner Hope Knight, Empire State Development.
Kevin Malone, New York State Health Department, representing State Health Commissioner McDonald.
Amanda Lefting, Acting Commissioner, Department of Environmental Conservation.
Jessica Waldorf, Chief of Staff and Director of Policy Implementation, New York State Department of Public Service, on behalf of Chair Rory Christian.
Hi, Roberta Reardon, Commissioner of Labor.
Keisha Santiago, Deputy Secretary of State, on behalf of Secretary of State Walter Mosley.
Is it on? Maybe not.
Jackie Bray, Commissioner at the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services.
Good afternoon, Rich Dewey, CEO and President of the New York Independent System Operator.
Thank you all. For the record, I note that we have a quorum for today's meeting, and I'll now turn to today's business. Next slide, please. Please note for the record that this agenda was shared with board members and posted on the Energy Plan website for the public to review on Monday, April 21st. Our agenda today is to review and approve the minutes of the March 3rd, 2025 board meeting, to discuss select energy plan topic areas, to discuss perspectives from major energy end-use sectors, to discuss other business, and to discuss next steps. Next slide. First, I'll kick us off today with a few words. Next slide. I did want to start by zooming out and sharing some broader context for the clean energy industry and certainly for the moment that we find ourselves in. First, I'll share some global context of where we are. And certainly alongside and following major global events such as COVID and the war in Ukraine, we have been witnessing broader macroeconomic trends such as global inflation and debt crises in a growing number of countries, which are leading to higher interest rates and higher cost of financing. All of this results in higher cost of energy development and higher energy prices. We witnessed the significant impact of these global economic conditions on domestic natural gas prices this winter, with a year-over-year increase of approximately 134% in average prices as of March 2025, which resulted in an 88% increase in average New York State wholesale electricity prices. Certainly, higher development costs coupled with public debt pressures are impacting infrastructure and clean energy development across the globe, not just in New York. In fact, every year from 2019 to 2021, governments around the world added more than 300 climate adaptation and mitigation policies each year. And notably, in 2024, it fell to under 50. So as we know, we are seeing a rapidly changing federal policy landscape as well, and certainly the shifts in priorities that come with that new federal administration. I think importantly, we have seen a move from the previous administration's focus on incentivizing for reshoring industry to the current administration's focus on tariff approaches to discourage imports as a means for domestic manufacturing. And certainly, the focus away from renewable energy technologies to conventional energy technologies is impacting projects themselves, putting at risk the financial positions of development, supply chains, and local jobs throughout the country and certainly within our state. And so the resulting uncertainty in the economy generally is manifesting in increasing costs for all energy and supply chains, not just renewable energy, as well as volatility in the stock market and various commodities markets. And as we speak, more uncertainty is also being felt with the budget reconciliation process that the U.S. Congress is currently negotiating. The impact to the energy industry as a result of that process remains to be seen, with a proposed budget anticipated in the next few months. So certainly, as several of these activities do impact both NYSERDA as well as the members of this Energy Planning Board, we have been closely monitoring the situation and assessing potential impacts, not only on our day-to-day operations, but on the plan itself. I also want to speak a bit more specifically to some of the economic trends we're seeing, driven by these global and federal trends, among other factors. Importantly, the S&P Global Clean Energy Transition Index has been in steady decline, with its value falling by more than half since 2021. This decline began before the change of federal administration, reflecting the realized effects of inflation, supply chain disruption, and interest rates, and certainly for which we in New York had seen those impacts on our project pipeline before. But impacts are being felt across the nation, not just in New York. In the U.S., nearly $8 billion in investments and 16 new large-scale factories and other projects were closed, canceled, or downsized in the first 3 months of 2025. These cancellations and reductions are unfortunately having the impact on the microeconomic level. About 7,800 new clean energy jobs were canceled in the first 3 months of the year nationwide, more than the 3 years of 2022 to 2024 combined. And so as these trends indicate, we are now in a new era after years of successful transition to green energy during a largely favorable and relatively predictable decade. So we need to keep these macro level dynamics at the forefront of our thinking, certainly necessary to plan for future development. Next slide, please. Despite the headwinds we face, there are certainly some positive macro trends to keep in mind, which this slide captures. Despite the headwinds we face, we see globally annual solar power installations more than doubled since 2021. Nationally, in 2024, renewable energy sources accounted for 90% of new U.S. utility-scale generating capacity. Wind capacity is up 23-fold in 2 decades, and utility-scale battery capacity is up 29-fold in 5 years. So certainly we do see areas of alignment with this federal administration, notably on the topic of innovation, manufacturing competitiveness, and technology development. Among them, certainly we see alignment with the realm of advanced nuclear energy, advanced geothermal technologies, hydroelectric power, seeing strong bipartisan support that shows evidence of opportunities to continue within this new administration. And globally, annual investment in energy transition doubled to $2 trillion in 3 years, with more than $1.6 billion of business investments in March alone, creating 5,000 new jobs. So here in New York, certainly we are undaunted in putting forward the policies and programs that send strong signals that we are a durable market and one that it can be invested in, not only here in the Energy Planning Board, but across our state. So we are committed to continuing our work to prioritize investments and policies that support these projects in communities across our state. Next slide. So, turning to some more recent news in New York. On Earth Day, Governor Hochul announced $60 million in new funding for the Environmental Bond Act. This new funding will support the next round of green resiliency grants, which support vital stormwater management and resilient infrastructure projects in flood-prone communities across New York State. And relatedly, marking our progress on climate, New York ranked 3rd in environmental quality in WalletHub's Greenest States scorecard. The scorecard found that New York has some of the lowest carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide emissions per capita, as well as the 2nd best soil quality in the country. And we also have been recognized for our achievements in energy efficiency. We have maintained our top 3 spot in the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economies scorecard for the 3rd year running. It recognizes the energy-saving policies and contributions across the entire state ecosystem. So I'm pleased to be able to share this recognition, certainly with the members of this Energy Planning Board, as well as other colleagues across the state. And of course, as we speak, we have the announcement from Governor Hochul of a budget deal for the fiscal year 2026. It will include a $1 billion investment in climate priorities. We expect bills to enact this funding in the coming days, and I do look forward to reporting back in future Energy Planning Board meetings as to the use of those funds. Next slide, please. Turning the spotlight now to some work of some of our board members. Just last week, it was announced that SUNY Oneonta purchased Tier 1 renewable energy certificates from our voluntary sales program at NYSERDA, enough to power 4 of their campus residence halls. And I'd say this provides a replicable model across the SUNY system, and one that I am very proud to share, of course, with Chancellor King. In March, DEC released its regulatory proposal for the mandatory greenhouse gas reporting rule and is currently collecting public comments and will be hosting several public hearings. Through July 1st, hearing dates are listed on this slide. At DOS, the Code Council released proposed changes to the State Energy Conservation Code. The proposed changes incorporate advancements in the most recent international building codes and will further advance the state's building efficiency, lower consumer energy bills for New Yorkers, and relieve demand on the energy system. Importantly, these changes also incorporated the recommendation from the state's Interagency Fire Safety Working Group that will advance battery energy storage system installation requirements, as well as safety codes that will be among the strongest in the nation. Next slide. And during last week's Public Service Commission session, the PSC took action on a proposal submitted by DPS and NYSERDA with proposed modifications to the New York Sun program. This action will benefit New Yorkers in 2 important ways. First, by devoting about half of the surplus funds to procure additional solar resources beyond the 10 gigawatts previously authorized, and the remaining funds will be directed to other programs to further enhance affordability for ratepayers. And last but not least, the Build Ready program has announced that a project will be built on one of the largest solar projects in the Adirondack Park. This was a transaction through which NYSERDA had pre-developed this property at the Benson Mine property in St. Lawrence County, and now will be built by a private developer into a 12-megawatt solar project. So certainly many agency updates, and we look forward to even more as this year progresses. As I turn to our next agenda item, I do want to acknowledge we've been joined by 2 additional members of the State Energy Planning Board. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Marie-Therese Dominguez, New York State Department of Transportation.
I'm Assemblymember Dee Dee Barrett, representing the beautiful 106th District, and here on behalf of Speaker Carl Hastie.
Thank you both. Next slide, please. The next item on the agenda today is to accept the meeting minutes of the State Energy Planning Board held on March 3rd, 2025. Are there any comments on the minutes? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes into the record and we'll post them on the website. Do I have a second? All members in favor? Anyone opposed? The minutes are accepted into the record. Thank you very much. Next slide. Moving to our next agenda item, over the board's next several meetings, we will invite agency staff to provide updates on the substantive topic areas that are now being developed for the draft state energy plan, consistent with the scope that this board approved at our March meeting. I want to say I sincerely appreciate the thoughtful work and collaboration that all agency staff teams are dedicating to this effort, well over 100 staff and more to come. So today we will hear from agency staff leading the development of the emergency preparedness and smart growth topics for the draft state energy plan. For each topic, the presenters will provide an overview of the key themes and potential strategies that are under development. We then will have an opportunity as a board to ask questions or provide comments for each presentation. I will now introduce Frank Champa, Program Manager for NYSERDA's Resiliency and Emergency Preparedness Team, who will present on emergency preparedness. Frank?
Good afternoon. My name is Frank Ciampa, and it's a pleasure to share with you all today a bit about some of the work that I do in partnership with a great team at NYSERDA, as well as many professionals in government and industry who do this line of work. Draw your attention to the slide content here. The objectives in our line of work are really simple. Number one, to protect public health, safety, and welfare. And number two, to increase the resiliency of energy services while minimizing economic disruption. So before going further, I thought it would be useful to give some context to that R term, resiliency, which can mean different things depending on who you're talking with. For this presentation, it's going to be used to describe energy emergency preparedness and security work for New York State that primarily focuses on handling energy service outages. So this is the short-term response and the short to medium-term planning work that my team and others are involved with. We definitely seek to understand some of the longer-term risks about what's going on with our changing energy systems, but I want to offer time as a useful framing to distinguish this work from the complementary climate change adaptation and resiliency work that my colleagues are also involved with that really focuses on the long-term implications of climate change and how the state can adapt to become more resilient to those changes. So with that framing, let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, so energy emergency preparations and responses are outlined in the New York State Energy Emergency Plan. This is integrated into the larger state comprehensive emergency management plan. This really keeps everyone aligned on roles and responsibilities, and our portfolio of plans and activities really keep us busy continually assessing what's going on in the world and how we might be able to support if needed. NYSERDA, like many other government entities, don't directly control the critical energy assets, but we actively coordinate our planning and analysis with those that do. Our goal is really stay sharp, and we maintain that edge by working our plans with response actions, multiple tests, training, and exercises throughout the year. And that's how we approach our work. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this formula and slight variations of it are frequently used in energy security planning or risk analysis in general. It's risk equals the probability of event times the impact of that event. So this is the simplest picture of the methods that we use to evaluate what's going on in the world and guide our work. New York's major critical energy assets and infrastructure are evaluated for threat probability, consequences, vulnerability for all hazards, and then we have some resulting risk scores from this formula that are used to prioritize the way that we approach our energy emergency response planning, mitigation, and other efforts that are coordinated in the state. So the right side of that equation, the right box, that stays relatively the same, but it's the left side of the equation where things get interesting because the threats out there in the world tend to change quite regularly. So what we can do is take a look on the next slide at some of the biggest risks facing our energy system. Next slide, please. So this chart on the slide presents a view of the different sectors of our energy system across the top to give some indication about how and where these risks show up. It's not a perfect cut up because many times these risks cover multiple segments of the energy system, and I'll go more on interdependencies in the next slide. But back to the chart down the left-hand side of the column, some of you may recall seeing these items as pieces that make up that risk equation from the prior slide, which again are continually monitored. So we've got the natural hazards from weather and climate change, along with examples from recent history, the physical threats and vulnerabilities from things like maintenance issues, human error, or even sabotage to the physical gear. And relatedly, that same equipment could be compromised by cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities that are ever present in our world today. So luckily, many of these issues show up along with early warning signs that indicate how things could potentially get worse over time, and we strive to promptly act on those signals to coordinate with others about getting back on track or preparing to weather the storm. Next slide. So the graphic on this slide is really meant to show some of those interdependencies that I had mentioned earlier. This particular one is sourced from our partners at the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Energy Resilience. They're a great partner in our work. And this particular one presents a view of electricity. So I'll first direct your attention to the right-hand side of this image, showing connections with the liquid fuels sector and natural gas sectors for power generation. And then that electricity is used just about everywhere, but especially within these critical and community lifelines that protect public health, safety, and the welfare of New Yorkers. Next slide, please. So much of what I've talked about refers to the energy system and the way that it is today. However, I'll repeat again that everything in this world is changing, and New York's energy system is part of a complex global supply network. So we've taken our own initiative as a state to do our part to deliver the energy that New Yorkers need while placing appropriate prioritization on decarbonization and resilience of our energy system. New York is leading the way on decarbonization, which means an increased electrification alongside the greater need to manage intermittent renewables, among other issues. So we've got some of the best and brightest experts across multiple energy domains, all thinking through these changes and how we can do it all right. So that means we're keeping focused on what's most important with energy assurance, and really leveraging what's working now while building a resilient and sustainable energy system that is consistent with our ambitious policy goals. So we appreciate and applaud the effort that's been made to date by our countless partners. And that work is really to understand what those risks are, get ahead of them as much as possible with smart approaches to risk mitigation, as well as to go further in this transition together. Next slide, please. And I believe this is the final. So emergency preparedness efforts strengthen not only the energy sector, but also increase the resiliency of New York State and its population. So here are a few bullets on how we can keep a good thing going. So the first bullet on this slide speaks to the complexity of the energy system, really that a disruption requires extensive coordination across multiple entities that are involved in emergency management. Pardon me. The second bullet on this slide helps to reinforce much of what we're doing already, but it really highlights that there is potential for disruption, and that requires extensive coordination. Pardon me, on that second bullet, let me repeat that. So it reinforces much of what we're doing today already, but it also highlights the value of taking a risk-based approach to focus on really what matters most today. The third point on the slide mentions the importance of coordination with industry, many of which are here today in this room, but really those in the room or not who have operational control over many of these assets. We really value the engagement that we've seen to date and continue to do that in our response and mitigation planning. So the last bullet, again, really acknowledges the important role of owners and operators of this infrastructure to continue their stewardship of these critical assets. And this is really amidst a very dynamic, changing energy landscape. So in closing, I want to reinforce that I do believe that New York is well positioned and prepared to respond to energy emergencies. I have confidence in the foundation of preparedness that is held in such high regard by many professionals who are working in this industry. And we find shared value in keeping the lights on and getting the fuel to to where it needs to go. So we hope to continue delivering a more resilient and clean energy system into the future. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. We have a few minutes for questions.
Staring at me. Afternoon. How much money, how much time and attention? What we're buying, how we're buying. Thinking about that in terms of how you trade off between how fast you can bring it back versus whether or not, as you're thinking through, whether or not you think that that answer changes in it.
Thank you, Commissioner Bray. So you're right, it is a balance between trying to manage that redundancy and that resilience. And I think time frame comes to mind again when thinking through how to respond. I mean, most of what we try and deal with are the first 72 hours of an emergency, and really what needs to be done to bring things back online. And luckily, we're part of a system that can generally get back online within that period of time. So this is where the value of redundancy tends to maybe not reveal itself as it would in conditions where there are prolonged outages. However, we are, in keeping our eyes on kind of the long game, looking at how we can direct those investments to make sure that those prolonged outages are avoided as much as possible, and that even those shorter outages are managed as best as possible. We have this idea of pairing different clean energy technologies. I think solar plus storage is a great option and offers both that clean energy as well as that backup power solution. So that's not right in all places, but definitely one of the early options to explore for many scenarios across the state.
What do you think are, I mean, I think, I get this question all the time, I never know how to answer it, but like, what keeps you up at night that would surprise us, right? Sort of, understanding the lay of the land, but what do you think we don't know? What do you think would sort of shock me to learn about preparedness in the space or the first 72 hours in the space?
There's two things. One, the complexity of the system itself, right? As someone who tries to study it, understand it, analyze it, there's a lot of moving pieces. And so the complexity really highlights the importance of finding solutions that work. I think one of the things that I have to remind myself, and it's not something that you wouldn't necessarily know, but especially with a lot of our discussions about what the future in 2040 or 2050 might look like, I think it's often useful to remind ourselves how our current energy system operates. And despite the clean energy and decarbonization goals that we have, there's still the priority to deliver the energy where it's needed. And there's still quite a reliance on kind of the old way of doing things. And this moment in time that we have right now in this transition, it may not be as smooth as possible, but this is where we really need to kind of be steadfast and ride the bumps through this transition so we can come out better at the other end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Frank?
Can I ask one more?
Always.
What do you wish we were doing across the sort of, interagency family that you're not sure we are doing at this point? What do you wish we were doing more of?
Well, I will say that regional coordination is a big thing. New York State is fairly large, but we're part of the Northeast of the United States that, oftentimes our infrastructure doesn't care where the state boundary lies. So we've been doing a lot in our own preparedness, but almost my wish is coming true this year because we're doing a lot and even have an exercise next month with a lot of our other states regionally coordinated with federal partners to say, what would this really look like? How can we communicate what's going on and provide a coordinated response to, as I said, get back on track or weather the storm, whatever it may be. So that type of regional coordination, I think, was the next thing within reach, and we're looking to grasp that now.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
You know, Commissioner Bray asked so many good questions that I almost don't want to ask a question after Commissioner Bray, but like something that just sits with me from listening to you, the way that our energy system works currently versus, I guess the question is, do you believe that our energy system now is a resilient energy system? If you could sort of redesign it today, what direction should we really be heading in, right? You're talking about we still have this old system of we have demand centers. We need to bring energy to those places. We're still pretty reliant on large scale generation rather than more distributed. What would actually a resilient energy system look like?
To summarize it up, hybrid, right? It's one of those things that acknowledges the legacy that we currently have with our energy system, the reliance on these systems that do work and deliver energy that's needed, but also where appropriate, finding those opportunities to have that clean energy solution be implemented. And it's not going to work in every situation, but NYSERDA is finding those areas that it works and is economical right here and now. So we're starting to see that transition. And I guess I'll close in saying something that I started with. I feel the energy system is resilient at present, right? We're not seeing a lot of the outages that might reveal itself elsewhere, which is a good thing. And I'm also very refreshed by the true responsiveness of the energy industry to make the changes, to come along for the ride. Most recently with biofuels in the state and requirements about blending, we're seeing those companies who are working the pipelines and the terminals invest in the new tanks to accommodate this new fuel commodity and do what's right to bring it to the market. So it's something that we are working on, and as I mentioned before, we've got a lot of smart people who are trying to build this new system, but I wouldn't say that it's getting rid of the old, but really transitioning to the new.
All right, I'm going to have to move on. Frank, thank you very much, and to the entire team contributing to this chapter. I do want to acknowledge, Mr. Suggs, would you like to identify yourself, having joined the meeting?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. First of all, I'm running behind a little bit. We're very busy in the downstate area. I'm William Suggs. I represent Abe NIMAC. I'm employed with Con Edison.
Thank you. So next, I will introduce two staff members from the Department of State who will present on smart growth. We have Paul Byard, Smart Growth Director, and Susan Landfried, a revitalization specialist. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair Harris, for the opportunity to talk about smart growth, a critical component of the state energy plan and so many other plans under development or completed in the state. On the broadest level, smart growth is a land use reform movement that addresses the built-in natural environment. And it's an approach, it's a philosophy that's based in an alliteration, the 4 E's: economy, equity, environment, and energy. Now, I will point out that energy was the latest E to be added to that alliteration. And that's exactly why we're here today, because there is a burgeoning convergence between energy and climate programs and policies and what we do at the Department of State with smart growth and community and economic development. So we try to achieve and integrate these 4 E's because in the end, it creates livable, inclusive, and sustainable communities for people of all ages, incomes, backgrounds, and abilities. Now that sounds lofty and rhetorical, but I can guarantee you that it is reality in the state now due to so many smart growth planning policies and programs, many of which are Department of State, but others that are scattered throughout state government. Next slide, please. Okay, bring it down a notch from the philosophy to the principles. Smart growth is grounded in sustainable planning principles, and I pulled out a few of them here. If you plan and zone your community for a mix of land uses, focused on downtowns and a compact mix of land uses, I should say, focusing on downtowns and existing neighborhoods, you can advance the state energy goals just with that one principle. We call for diverse transportation options like walkable, bikeable, transit-accessible streetscapes, in addition to automobiles, of course. A variety of housing types, designs, and price points. You don't see that in a lot of communities that were built in the post-war sprawl era. We're trying to get back to the original form of development we saw in the beginning of the 20th century, which is really a picture of smart growth. Climate resiliency, adaptation, and mitigation can be handled in the context of planning, zoning, and development. So that has become one of our most recent additions to the list of smart growth principles, and moving forward, one of the more important ones. Well-planned and accessible public spaces that you can get to, that you can enjoy, that are safe, and the strategic preservation of open space, including natural and working lands, all planned within the context of an inclusive, community-based outreach and engagement process. The smart growth reform movement is known for its planning principles, which I just explained, but the sub-theme to it has always been to do more outreach, to do place-based planning so that you're doing what the community wants and not just what the state wants. And we place a tremendous emphasis on that at the Department of State. Encompassing all of these concepts is what's known as location efficiency. We're trying to create location efficient land uses. Now it's just a nerdy term for building things that are proximate and accessible to one another. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Susan Landfried to talk about some of the specific findings and recommendations that manifest that concept of location efficiency.
Thanks, Paul. Next slide, please. So in our analysis of how smart growth practices can result in energy savings and then generation and storage opportunities, we identified 4 key findings and related recommendations, with the first one focused on transportation. So this key finding was that smart growth practices create walkable, bikeable, transit-accessible infrastructure and land use patterns that are less dependent on more energy-intensive transportation. And we think of energy-intensive transportation in this context as private automobiles. So with that, we have identified a few different related recommendations that we're working on developing. The first one is about prioritizing and coordinating investments in these location efficient areas, these walkable, bikeable, transit accessible communities that have that mix of uses and proximity to daily destinations, to enable and further encourage compact development and then reduce that private automobile usage. So this looks at coordinating and incentivizing investments such as infrastructure and transportation improvements, housing and mixed use developments, as well as non-vehicular mobility investments, which the state already is working on, thinking about bike lanes, e-bikes, e-scooters, and other shared mobility type of opportunities. Additionally, we look at land conservation as critical to this component as well, because it helps reinforce smart growth practices by directing development towards existing neighborhood cores and then preventing sprawl into undeveloped, more automobile-centric areas. Our second recommendation is around supporting smart growth, supporting local governments with smart growth planning. Because local governments have land use authority, providing funding and technical assistance to help them develop and implement plans that support smart growth development and the principles that Paul outlined can help reduce private automobile usage. And as noted, the state already takes a number of actions that contribute to smart growth practices. These are just a few of the ones on the slide that the state already does, including the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, New York Forward, Restore New York, and New York Main Street, which seek to revitalize neighborhood centers and downtowns. The smart growth planning programs that are found across multiple state agencies, and they serve as clean transportation, clean mobility program, and then the master plan for aging as well, which calls for communities where people can age in place, which for many older residents means being able to access daily amenities without an automobile. Next slide, please. So our second finding is looking a little bit more at the built environment, in which we found that greater building density, compact infrastructure, and green infrastructure can yield energy savings and revitalize neighborhoods. So our first recommendation that we're developing is about developing guidance for the local incorporation of environmentally sustainable design. So this can include green infrastructure, thinking about street trees, bioswales, rain gardens, as well as passive neighborhood design, which thinks about how we can use the natural elements to improve building efficiency. Our second recommendation is about defining and measuring the energy and fiscal impacts of smart growth development in order so that we can better define these benefits and impacts and then help refine and implement the most effective strategies for reducing energy associated with the built environment. Our last two recommendations focus on developing in these location efficient areas to avoid the increased energy use associated with building out and operating sprawling infrastructure networks. With that, the third recommendation is to design and adapt incentives to encourage housing, commercial, and mixed-use development in these location-efficient areas and take advantage of that infrastructure that's already existing. Relatedly, the last recommendation is to help expand opportunities for infill development in vacant, underutilized, and brownfield areas. Again, using that existing infrastructure and providing an opportunity to add the amenities needed for that location-efficient community. Again, we have a number of actions that the state already undertakes contributing to this, including brownfield opportunity area and brownfield cleanup programs, green resiliency grants, climate smart community supports an array of actions that contribute to smart growth, as well as local waterfront revitalization and South Shore Estuary Reserve, which helps in some of the resiliency and green infrastructure and building out public spaces that are, again, important to helping cool our communities. Next slide, please. And then our third recommendation is about integrating renewable energy into local land use planning and zoning with the goal of having more coordinated opportunities to produce and store energy and then enhance community resilience. Our three recommendations here primarily focus on helping local governments plan for and implement renewable energy. So this includes the continued developments of local land use best practices, tools, and ordinances for planning and siting for renewables, battery storage, EV charging stations, and distributed energy systems in appropriate areas, enhancing technical assistance and outreach and education on minimizing the impacts of renewable energy, particularly in areas with an abundance of natural and working lands, and then collaborating with regional planning boards and counties to help these local governments plan for and review renewable energy projects. And with that, I'll turn over the last one to my colleague, Paul.
Sure. Thanks, Susan. So it's pretty clear, I would guess, that smart growth is a very multidimensional, holistic approach. It touches on so many different disciplines, and therefore it cries out for interagency and intergovernmental collaboration. So that's our last set of findings, and the related recommendations are threefold. Quite simply, expand the smart growth planning and zoning programs. Our planning and zoning programs are oversubscribed, to say the least. So there is a demand to shift from sprawling planning and development to smart growth planning and zoning. We know that. The desire is there. So what we picture in our head is a map with an abundance of little colored spots that are smart growth plans and that are dictated by smart growth, guided by smart growth plans and zoning ordinances. By the way, local comprehensive plans and local zoning ordinances are reserved for the local governments to complete and implement. It's different from a lot of other state policies. It's called home rule. So we must support those communities, and we must establish a base, a policy and a legal base to even get to smart growth projects. We are proposing an interagency working group to put smart growth in a statewide framework, to bring all these pieces together in a coherent fashion that the public can use, which would include a user-friendly data portal and other resources to support smart growth development patterns. It's one thing to have a robust planning and zoning program. It's another to help people help themselves, to train them and support them in their efforts, because it's not easy. Smart growth is not easy. There are controversial components to it, and so they need as much, communities need as much support as we can provide to them. And finally, on the intergovernmental realm, There's a section of town and city and village law, it's called Section 239M and N, and it actually allows counties to comment on comp plans and zoning ordinances and development decisions that affect other municipalities. Takes a very regional, multi-municipal lens, but they can only comment on these practices and these plans. We don't want to take home rule away, but we would like to find a way to give the counties a greater role, a greater say in development patterns, again, because they do have that essential regional multi-municipal lens. So that wraps up our findings and recommendations. Really appreciate you highlighting smart growth here and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Paul and Susan. Do any of the members have questions? Assemblymember?
Thank you. I'm a huge fan of smart growth and have been for a long time, so I enjoyed hearing all of your recommendations representing 27 different municipalities. I deal a lot with this in my district. You did not use the expression complete streets at all in any of this, and I wondered if that is a policy that's no longer in favor. Do you think about this? Is there a way the state could be involved in this in a way that helps pay for some of these complete streets if you support that? So love to hear your thoughts on complete streets.
Sure, 100%. Our absence was not something that we intentionally did. Complete streets are 100% important to the smart growth movement. That is about providing all users of roadways, drivers, bicyclists, walkers, et cetera, safe access on these roadways. And so that really does actually contribute to this idea of having these location efficient and smart communities. So that was an entirely accidental absence of not including that policy in our presentation, but it's 100% critical to these recommendations and to this thought and philosophy.
So, and I would encourage, as with the other parts of, of working together, is if the state can figure out a role to help pay for some of this, that's always been one of the challenges in moving some of this forward. So thank you.
Just add that many of our awardees to the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, one of our signature programs, have included Complete Streets projects really as a centerpiece of their downtown revitalization strategy. So it's critical, and they either use the term complete streets or walkable, bikeable, transit accessible streets. But again, we know there's a demand out there. It's really expensive. Fortunately, the DRI, provides a sizable grant, and they can include that in their package of projects.
I'll just underscore that as part of the DRI initiative, there's a lot of advisement from state agencies exactly how to do that, especially those that are.
Thanks to sorry, should have told you sooner. Thanks to the great DOS team for this. I'll just take the opportunity to say that this was a great rundown and really solid recommendations, and appreciate you mentioning brownfields and understand our collaboration on that. Also want to note and take the opportunity that the state Superfund program is also a really critical tool here, which I have to say, of course, because our reauthorization is up in this year's budget, and excitingly, hopefully, we will continue to have that important program to help clean up these industrial sites to put them to beneficial reuse for communities.
Excellent.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you both for the presentation. And certainly, I'm sure there'll be more discussion on this topic. If we turn to the next slide, I will now introduce today's panel. As you may recall, today's panelists are going to collectively speak to how decision makers and consumers think about energy use and energy upgrades. So collectively, this panel of speakers represents the 4 major energy end use sectors: residential, buildings, commercial buildings, the industrial sector, and transportation. So I would say specifically, these sectors all face particular challenges and opportunities as they move through the clean energy transition, which are important to keep top of mind in developing the energy plan. Our experts today will speak to these dynamics and surface some key considerations for the state's Energy Planning Board. We do have 4 presentations, so I will ask the board to hold their questions until the end of the panel. So let's please start with our first panelist, Lori Wheelock, is the Executive Director and General Counsel of the Public Utility Law Project, or PULP. PULP is a nonprofit based here in Albany and advocates for universal service, affordability, and consumer protection for New York State utility customers. And today, Lori will speak to the perspectives of low and fixed income utility consumers. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you so much, Chair Harris, and for the entire board for having PULP here today. Again, my name is Lori Wheelock. I go by she, hers pronouns. I'm the executive director of PULP. Our organization not only advocates for low-income and fixed-income residential utility customers in rate cases and policy proceedings, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, some of our greatest success and some of the best results we have are through our direct service program. So just like any legal aid organization throughout this state, people can call our helpline, and my amazing team helps people every single day keep their service, restore their service if they fall behind and get disconnected, and seek resources. We work extremely closely with NYSERDA's 12 regional energy hubs. We help people through the emergency, and then we refer them to the hubs for energy efficiency resources, Empower Plus, for instance. And so we work very closely with a network of providers throughout the state. So today, my remarks are going to kind of fall through that lens. We have on our next slide some examples of some of the barriers, some of the bumps in the road that low-income and fixed-income individuals face on a daily basis when we're trying to help them. But what I'm excited about is being here today because I know the state is thinking about this. And if we work together, we'll be able to address these through kind of a toolbox approach. So we broke down our kind of barrier discussion into 4 sections. The first is really program eligibility and access issues. Again, we're in New York. We are so grateful to have things like the Energy Affordability Program where you can get monthly discounts off of your utility bills. We have Empower Plus that can help people get energy audits and get, an electric heat pump potentially. And then the Home Energy Assistance Program, or HEAP, is federal money that comes to the state to help low-income households heat their homes. The issues we see, though, is just the difficulty. We have people go to one agency and maybe they're not aware of the other programs that are available. And so we never want people to miss that universe. The next is just the application fatigue. Our team tries to help people with one form. You may need another, you might need your deed, your rent, you might need a bill that's less than 30 days old for another. And so just those kind of different components logistically can be very hard for people. Eligibility requirements are also a little bit all over the place at times. Sometimes it asks for monthly income, sometimes it asks for annual income. And even the definition of what is low income is really important right now. There's also special relationships, that tenant, that landlord. Some of those programs need that landlord's approval. When we talk to tenants, sometimes they immediately get that nerve of, the nervousness of, I don't know, what do I do? How do I approach my landlord? The second bucket is kind of financial issues. We're coming out of a real winter where we had a polar vortex. It was colder. Bills were higher because usage is higher. We do have rate plans where delivery rates are going up each year. And so that has kind of created a lot of anxiety for the people we serve. In talking about them with the interest of transitioning, which there is a lot of. We have people who want solar panels, they want clean energy, they want to electrify. Sometimes they ask us, well, what will my electric bill look like though, if I make that transition? Sometimes when we go down that pathway, they may not be able to proceed because of different pre-electrification costs, paneling, wiring, foundation, mold, those types of issues. I think there's also in our demographic people who get used to having certain winter financial assistance programs like HEAP, and maybe they're not to the same degree during the hot summer months. And so that is, kind of a barrier at times. We've also had a very interesting issue come up recently. And again, I think this is the growing pains. We are having programs, we're moving forward as a state, but we have had some customers come to us who actually missed out on certain financial assistance benefits because they weren't able to apply in time because their utility needs to code their electric account as heating. And so they've gone through, they've installed that heat pump, but because the social service agency doesn't know that the electric account is now heating, they may miss out on the home energy assistance program. We had one individual, it took about a year to get that code changed. So we're very interested in how can we address that right now and just stop that from moving forward. Next is the policy, the federal uncertainty. A lot of our people rely on SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, HEAP for heating, Social Security benefits. And so one of those gets threatened or one of those gets cut, and that affects their entire financial world. Structural barriers, it really comes down to the rate design. I never in my life have heard someone say something about the revenue decoupling mechanism in a meeting until this week. And it happened publicly at a hearing. People are paying attention to their bills. They're asking good questions. And so having that ability to work with the state on those, different components of the bill is tremendously important. So while those, again, are some of the barriers or, again, some of the bumps that we see, there are a lot of good recommendations and, again, hope because of the work that you're all doing here. So going to the next slide, greater interagency communication. We've heard this already today. There are so many of you here. If we can create a no wrong door approach, so if someone goes to one agency, they get the suite of programs through all. Coordinating to create universal applications instead of the individual will be tremendously helpful for the people that we're serving. We are so excited to have data matching between our utilities and the Office of Temporary Disability and Assistance come online this year. But where else can we expand data matching so the agencies can share information about income and help people apply for different programs? Maybe the Department of Tax and Finance, maybe NYSERDA, maybe the Department of Health. Gap funding also being discussed in the budget, so excited to see where that goes. Help people afford their bills now. Is there a way to show shadow bills and what that would look like if someone were to electrify? And also if the state can take a study into what alternative rates we might be able to implement here in New York. Time of use is being used in some places, electric heat pump rates in some of the utilities. Where can we learn? Where can we share that data? It's also a good opportunity with the federal uncertainty potentially of funding some of these low-income programs. How do we define what is low income in New York? Should we have maybe a broader definition? What does moderate income look like? And then next is just that expanded targeted education and outreach. How can we reach out into the communities, work with them from the ground up? Maybe we can have special task force that work with tenants, but also task force that work with the landlords and help show them some of the benefits of these programs, why it's in their interest to seek some of them as well for their tenants. With the utilities, again, with that coding issue, we look forward to figuring out how they do the coding change on the ground to have electric heating accounts match so that the agencies at the social services level can get people those benefits. And then last but not least is just ongoing communication for these vulnerable populations, making sure that once we're successful, once we get them, electrified, can we follow up with them? How are you doing? If they have a spike in usage, is there a way to reach out to them, make sure that they're doing okay? I think at the end of the day, again, this is one of the strengths of New York, is that we are here. We're paying attention. We know there's a lot of uncertainty, but if we work together, we can address these different barriers and bumps and then make that change for people on the ground. So thank you again for having me here today. I really appreciate it. And Pulp thanks everyone as well.
Thank you, Lori. I misspoke. There's 5 presenters. I didn't forget about one. So our next presentation will be led by Jeff Pearlman, the CEO and Chief Strategy Officer of Bright Power. Bright Power is based in New York City and provides real estate owners, operators, and developers with sustainable energy solutions and services with a mission to accelerate the equitable transition to a zero carbon future. Today, Jeff will speak to the perspectives of multifamily residential buildings. Welcome, Jeff.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me here today. Next slide, please. So 20 years ago, in the next slide, 20 years ago, I started Bright Power, which has grown to be one of the leaders in energy efficiency for multifamily buildings. Our main office and the majority of our projects are in New York, but we have projects in all 50 states and have worked with over 10% of the country's multifamily housing units. So I'm excited to share some of my insights about how we can affordably reduce carbon emissions in this important sector. Next slide, please. First, a little bit of table setting. So nationally, about 20% of homes are in multifamily buildings with 5 or more units. In New York State, 35%. In New York City, over 60%. So there's a lot of these buildings and a lot of units. Next slide, please. There's also a lot of diversity in the physical characteristics of what is a multifamily building, from low-rise townhouses and garden-style apartments where there's individual entrances for each unit, to mid-rise buildings that can be built anytime in the last 100 years, to high-rise buildings, sometimes with, sometimes without balconies, to luxury skyscrapers. And these different construction types have varied systems. They have different sizes of electrical service, different types of mechanical systems, some in basements, some on roofs, some in the apartments, some central, different qualities of construction. All of that stuff factors into what efficiency and decarbonization upgrades you can make for a building. Next slide, please. Multifamily buildings also encompass a wide variety of human, financial, political factors that influence how a building uses energy, and what changes can be made to the building, how decisions get made in the building, and how the upgrades might get paid for. So for example, a building that houses families uses a lot more hot water than a building that houses seniors. An owner-occupied co-op or condo can make a longer-term values-based decision compared to, say, a private equity-backed rental property, but the co-op and condo board takes longer to make decisions. Rent-stabilized buildings, which make up 42% of New York City's housing, have regulations that govern what types of improvements they can make. And how those impact their tenants. So it's important when we think about multifamily to bucket multifamily buildings into different common archetypes and create programs that are tailored to specific physical, tenant, and owner characteristics, because that's not universal. Next slide, please. Further, the people who own and operate apartment buildings face a lot of urgent demands, and they don't really have a lot of time to think about energy. One of the big benefits of energy benchmarking laws like New York's Local Law 84 or building performance standards like New York City's Local Law 97 is that they turn energy into a regulatory compliance need, which raises its priority for property managers. Okay, so next slide, please. Given all of this, how do we drive affordable decarbonization in multifamily buildings? So next slide. One of the key things is to avoid making energy retrofits their own thing, and rather piggyback on other building life cycle events. The easiest is at the time when you refinance or sell a building. About every 10 or 15 years, most multifamily properties get a new mortgage, at which time they receive an infusion of capital and undergo a renovation. Green mortgages are already proven at scale. Fannie Mae has financed green upgrades in over 4,000 multifamily projects and over 1 million units across the country. So one key recommendation is that New York align energy programs with mortgage financing, starting with robust energy disclosure requirements at each transaction. Another major life cycle event is when equipment gets replaced. Many property managers are reactive. They replace a piece of equipment when it breaks. However, it's almost impossible to swap out a fossil fuel system for an electric system in an emergency. You need to do preparatory electrical work in advance in order to be able to make that change. Otherwise, the quickest thing is they're just going to replace a gas boiler with a gas boiler, and you end up with 30 more years of using gas. Next slide, please. The economics really matter. A financial decision maker is going to consider the upfront cost or capital cost and the ongoing operating cost. And electrification is particularly unappealing if both the upfront cost and the ongoing cost are higher. So we have to make the economics favorable. And fortunately, there are some ways that we can do that. On the front end, we can look at incentives or rebates, but also we can negotiate bulk procurement of heat pumps to drive down the cost of the equipment, similar to the way that NYCHA has done for heat pump manufacturers within public housing. And on the operating costs, we've heard this already, owners and residents are concerned about future energy prices, particularly future electric prices. And so the more that we can do to negotiate and offer long-term electric price certainty, we should, particularly as our grid becomes more renewable, which we certainly are seeking to achieve. It should be easier to do because we shouldn't be bound to fossil fuel prices. And fossil fuel prices will maintain volatile because that's a larger market. Next slide, please. Electrification does not need to be all or nothing. Hybrid solutions can deliver large carbon reductions cost effectively. And by hybrid electrification, I mean electrifying as much as the existing service capacity will allow, eliminating the need for costly service upgrades. In many cases, existing service can support more than what a conservative engineer might estimate. And when there isn't sufficient service to provide heating on the very coldest days, fossil fuel systems can kick in. More than 80% of the time, you won't need them. Note that in our summer peaking system, using electricity in the winter is a benefit because it more fully utilizes the existing infrastructure. This should drive down the overall cost of electricity and justifies offering lower rates for electric heating, which we should continue to grow and pursue. And lastly, the fossil fuel backup could be gas, but it could also be a delivered fuel. And electric rates need to be structured so the electric option is always the most cost-effective option, except when the grid is constrained. Okay, next slide. In a single-family home, residents pay the utility bill. When they go to work or they go on vacation, they adjust the thermostat, and that minimizes their energy usage. However, in most apartment buildings, especially in older buildings, the residents have no control over their temperature. Apartments are heated and often overheated, regardless of if anyone is home. Most electric heating systems for apartments will give residents temperature control, and moving the cost of operating the HVAC system onto the tenants gives them both control and the incentive to minimize their energy consumption while maintaining a temperature that's comfortable for them when they're home. There are some real concerns about this that agencies have brought up. If a landlord stops paying for heat and installs heat pumps, and the tenants have to pay to operate those heat pumps, then that is essentially a rent increase. But there are mechanisms to mitigate that. There are utility allowances or reductions in rent that can be provided commensurate with the cost of running the heat pumps, or we can provide direct energy subsidies to lower income residents to help pay their utility bills. And I strongly encourage DPS to work with HCR, Homes and Community Renewal, on equitable mechanisms to shift heating costs onto tenants in a fair and equitable way that also doesn't increase their overall cost of a home. And the potential energy savings are so great that both landlords and tenants should be able to see savings through that. It's important that the new electric equipment is both efficient and properly sized and installed, and also training is really critical. Heat pump systems do not operate the same way as fossil fuel systems, so contractors, building staff, and tenants need to be trained in how to install and maintain them properly. Okay, next slide. So a couple of other points about changing some of the defaults. So we would strongly recommend that we create statewide energy benchmarking and energy performance standards, which will provide the regulatory pressure to spur buildings to take action. Upgrade infrastructure at a neighborhood scale. Going building by building is time consuming and inefficient. Much like when we replaced neighborhood gas mains a decade ago, if utilities are encouraged to strategically select and schedule neighborhoods for infrastructure updates and building electric conversions, that's more efficient than going building by building. We should focus on simple rebates, bulk purchasing, and upstream incentives. Paperwork is a real problem at the resident level and at the building level. So we need to reduce paperwork by providing incentives more efficiently. We should stop all the incentives for converting to natural gas. That includes eliminating the 100-foot rule and any other gas expansion. And also, we need to be really careful that we minimize the cost of maintaining the existing gas grid. I think we're overspending to replace existing gas pipe, and that raises the energy cost for everybody. So if we can instruct utilities to use the lowest cost O&M solutions that are like 10-year repairs, not 50-year repairs, that should be good enough. Last slide, which is just a summary of points about piggybacking on life cycle events, use economics to drive behavior, promote hybrid electrification, overcome split incentives. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I never questioned you could get through those slides in 8 minutes. Our next presentation will be led by Zach Steinberg, the Senior Vice President of Policy for the Real Estate Board of New York, or REBNY. REBNY represents building owners, developers, and other real estate partners across New York. Zach today will speak to these perspectives. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll be relatively short and say I think Jeff did a great job of summarizing the challenges in the real estate space. And so I'll try to skip through some of my slides that might be a little bit redundant with what he said. But if you go to the next slide, next one, please. So just to get started, I mean, it's pretty clear we're not going to achieve the Climate Act goals without decarbonization of the building sector. But I think it's very important to point out that we have a very strong foundation for that work. That's in no small part due to the relationships between real estate companies and the partnerships with agencies represented here today, including NYSERDA, DPS, and others. I want to talk quickly about some of the challenges and then try to emphasize a point that Jeff made that I think is very important, which is policy and regulation will be most effective when it recognizes how and when building owners actually make investments. Commercial real estate, just like in the multifamily side, whether it's an office building, a hotel, retail, an apartment building, they make capital upgrades when equipment reaches the end of its life When space turns over, either a tenant leaves or they're getting ready for a new tenant, or in an emergency. And those are the times when policy and regulation has to provide the right combination of carrots and sticks to achieve the decarbonization outcomes we all want. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're starting from a really strong foundation. Particularly want to call out here the Empire playbooks and the related programs that NYSERDA has developed in partnership with leading real estate companies. They really do show the way for how to reduce reliance on fossil fuels and cut energy consumption in our buildings. The challenge we've got to figure out in New York is how we see that knowledge and skill turned into widespread action. So let's take a closer look at some particular sectors on the next slide, starting with office buildings. On the positive side, office buildings tend to be less reliant on on-site fossil fuel combustion for heating needs than residential buildings, and they're typically more reliant on energy, on electricity, and in New York City, particularly district steam. This means that as electricity and steam generation relies less on fossil fuels over time, the emissions associated with those office buildings is going to tend to come down faster than in residential buildings. Similarly, there are important market forces in the office sector that are very helpful, particularly the shared corporate climate commitments of both owners and the tenants they're trying to attract and to take space in those buildings. At the same time, challenges abound. I'll spend more time on the economics in a second, but I do want to call particular attention to the challenges aligning owner and tenant interests in the office sector. So on the right side of the screen is a summary of a report from the Building Energy Exchange called Decarbonizing New York City Offices that identifies a number of common challenges that I think are important for this group to take seriously and to grapple with. On the next slide, similarly in the residential sector, and Jeff sort of outlined this very well, but again, I want to do call out that there are here, I think, on the positive side, more incentives and instead of the office side, it's a little bit easier to scale the kind of interventions you want because there is more similarity, particularly in the smaller multifamily buildings, so that the solutions tend to be a little bit easier and can be replicated from different building to different building, which is a lot harder in the office side. Again, though, the economics are quite challenging, and you see some of that in another Building Energy Exchange report that's sort of highlighted on the right side of this slide. On the economics on the next slide. On this slide, you'll see two charts from NYSERDA's Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap that I think are important to take seriously. They're a couple of years old at this point, but I think they make the point that's still true today. In general, property owners and commercial real estate owners do not make investments that don't generate returns or paybacks. Electrification and efficiency projects today do not have paybacks that make them attractive. So the figure on the bottom left shows that it costs about $20,000 per unit in upfront cost to retrofit a mid-rise multifamily building with operational savings of $500 a year. On the bottom right, it shows the same for office, where the upfront cost of $8.80 a square foot in incremental expense over a baseline investment only generates 40 cents per square foot in savings. These economics are not attractive and pose a very significant hurdle to major projects. The next slide. Economic considerations are not the only thing that matters here. One of those is the challenge of implementing construction projects in occupied spaces where people live and work. No one wants to live or work in an active construction site, and many of these projects require very comprehensive work to buildings. In office buildings, retail, or industrial settings, the lease often restricts the ability of the owner to conduct construction work in the tenant's space while it's occupied in any case. Another challenge is finding space for new equipment. Here, it's also important to keep in mind that space that is used for large mechanical systems in New York City is heavily regulated by provisions of the New York City zoning resolution, which also sets limits on the size of mechanical spaces before that space counts against rentable area. Finally, it's also worth pointing out that electrification projects can necessitate very extensive work in the building and in the street to improve the local distribution network. For example, many buildings, you can't simply replace a natural gas stove with an induction electric cooktop because there's not the power in the building to serve that new load. Similarly, you'd find the same if you're going to try to install EV charging infrastructure in a garage. If that new load necessitates improvements to the local distribution infrastructure, in addition to the work that's needed in the building, it makes executing projects very difficult and much more expensive. So for all those reasons on the next slide, I think it's important to make a few observations, and I'll be quicker because it's largely the same thing that Jeff just said. People invest at particular moments in time, and policymakers need to think about at those moments how you can buy down the marginal cost of making a change in the owner's behavior. So I'll just summarize there. So next slide, please. Before I wrap up, I just want to talk about a couple of other issues that are outside of the building owner's control that are very important. One of those is we cannot decarbonize buildings without electricity and in New York City district steam being generated from zero carbon sources. I want to spend a second on district steam because it's an often not talked about set of the puzzle here, but it's really important in New York City commercial real estate. District steam Con Ed system serves about 1,600 customers in Manhattan today, including many of the very largest office buildings and complexes in the city. However, it remains incredibly unclear whether, when, and how Con Edison will generate district steam without the use of fossil fuels. If there is no viable pathway for district steam generation to be decarbonized, it will create a number of challenges. First, it will necessitate substantially more capital investment in buildings that currently use district steam. Second, related to this, many district steam buildings don't have the space in the building to install electric equipment because district steam is basically a pipe in the wall. For these reasons, we hope the energy plan will commit to seeing a decarbonized district steam system come to fruition. If it does not, the plan will then need to account for the reality that eliminating district steam will significantly increase electric load in Manhattan, putting even more strain on the local distribution network and the overall electric grid. Next slide, I alluded to this earlier, and Jeff did as well, as did Lori, but electricity costs are very high. They're rising faster than inflation, and they're poised to increase even more in the coming years. On the right side, not to pick on them, but just because it is relevant for a New York City-based trade association, are Con Edison's initial electric rate requests for the last several rate cases. These rate requests are the result of several factors, but it's important to point out they don't yet reflect the full extent of work that's going to be required to build out the local distribution infrastructure to account for building and transport electrification, nor do they account for the added cost of the continued scale up in renewable generation and transmission. Next slide. Lastly, and I know this has come up in prior meetings here, but you know, the real estate community is acutely aware of the reliability warnings being made by the New York ISO, and addressing reliability is hugely important part of this puzzle. So just to conclude, you know, given the opportunities and obstacles, on the next slide, please, it's important to build a regulatory structure that helps to overcome these economic and practical constraints. It should try to align mandates and incentives with the moment in time when owners make significant investments in the buildings to reduce marginal costs. Further, it should recognize that owners do not typically electrify in one shot, as Jeff alluded to. Projects occur over time as systems need to be replaced. So policy frameworks that recognize how real estate invests and holds owners responsible for what they control should be prioritized. Incentive programs will need to be scaled up from grants to low-cost loans to tax credits to help fix that gap between the upfront costs and future savings. And efficiency needs to remain a key metric, given that it's going to help reduce consumption costs and overall load growth. In addition, we do need to have deeper thinking about how we identify ways to constrain electricity cost growth. Jeff alluded to some, Lori alluded to others. And lastly, I think to leave you with a final thought, we will need to contend with the reality that big buildings are really important, but they only account for about half of emissions in the building sector. So we're going to have to think about how we deal with the other half of the building stock as well over time. So thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Next, we will hear from Randy Wolken, the President and CEO of the Manufacturers Association of Central New York, or MACNY. MACNY represents manufacturers in central and upstate New York, and today, Randy will speak to the perspectives of our manufacturing industry. Randy.
Thank you for having me here. Good to see so many friends in the room. It's a privilege actually to serve so many manufacturers throughout New York State. Next slide, please. MACNY has the privilege of serving 340 manufacturers with over 100,000 employees through 26 counties itself, but through our 9 partners serve over 5,400 organizations who really represent nearly 500,000 manufacturing employees throughout the state. Most people don't understand just how important manufacturing is to New York State. We are the 10th largest manufacturing state in the country, and quite frankly, have the opportunity now to be the 5th largest or even higher, given the massive amount of interest and investment now being paid to New York State. What makes it so important to understand is that the landscape related to energy usage has dramatically changed. Next slide, please. What's really changed is record demand need will likely require investing in existing infrastructure, in existing energy provision, plus massive amounts of new energy. This is unprecedented in our lifetimes. But we're also talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of capital investment and literally the same amounts in future revenue related both to New York State and the population. This will require a very different look at the world in which energy is looked at. The CLCPA does add a specific uncertainty, and in the world today, certainty is the lifeblood of investment, as you've heard the other panelists talk about. Manufacturers today, you see the impact of tariff uncertainty. At some point, that has to level out and become real. But what we know for sure is a long-term trend is reshoring. There's a massive amount of reshoring that's currently happening, and projects today that have already been announced may be on pause, but they're planning on going forward. We just had another $1.3 billion investment announced by Chobani for food production in Utica. So this is not going away. In fact, this is a huge opportunity for New York State, again, to grow population, have those populations get paid better through fantastic jobs and for the long-term viability. But certainty, not multi-decade certainty, is what is needed for many of these investments. Next slide, please. Really, when you talk about manufacturing investment, it's really a three-legged stool. Do you have the resources? Does tax policy account for long-term investment and growth? And do you have the workforce? If you have these three items, you can be a powerhouse in manufacturing. Once, like New York State was, there was a reason why we called ourselves the Empire State at one time. That is now available. When I took this job over 20 years ago, I never thought I would say that. It's now available. The world wants to make products in the United States. We have to do it from a national security perspective, and people want to do it locally, not have extended supply chains around the globe. The importance of energy to manufacturing can't be understated because of its percentage of costs and how vital it is to the long term. Quite frankly, it's not just, is there energy? What's the quality of that energy? A millisecond of interruption can cause millions of dollars of loss. So the quality of that energy, the availability of that energy, the timeline of that energy, all of that matters now for these mega projects and also for the existing manufacturing base. As I mentioned, it's quite large and it's also upgrading and expanding at the same time. So growth in terms of new economic opportunity requires finding levels of predictability. I think we're going to have to learn how to do both, extend the existing infrastructure and grow it, and add new, cleaner, decarbonized energy. The good news is we, as already mentioned, have one of the cleanest grids in the world. So we already have a competitive advantage. To be a leader, we have to continue to keep doing that while maintaining economic growth. Our main opportunity here is actually being a leader in how we do it, being practical about doing it, because we can lead the world. In fact, if we can eliminate all of our carbon, it doesn't really impact the overall carbon in the world. So our desire is to be the leader in how you move to a cleaner, competitive grid. Competitiveness is the hallmark of the manufacturing sector. Price sensitivity matters greatly, as you can see just by looking at tariffs. The reality is you have to be competitive. So we have to be competitive. Otherwise, they're going to go to states nearby, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and places throughout the country like North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Florida. But we can be, and I think we will be competitive in most every other space, workforce, water. But the real challenge, I think, is we got to make sure we get energy right. Otherwise, we don't even get a chance at it. The last thing is leakage will occur with existing manufacturers. They'll extend those lines someplace else, or they won't do it here at all. That will make the world worse off when it comes to carbon. These other places do not have the grids that we have, and they don't have the same intentionality that we do. So it's really important we not let existing manufacturers, high-tech companies leave, as well as we do secure the future of manufacturing for this country. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the type of energy and the use of energy is radically important for the investments that we've made over the next 2 decades plus. As I mentioned, uninterrupted energy is critical. It has to be safe, reliable, and high quality. It also has to be affordable. For even the smallest interruptions dramatically change the desire to invest in our state. There is a variety of resources needed for the manufacturing sector. Natural gas is required. It will be required for at least the next 2 decades. Not every piece of equipment, but also it's needed for a wide variety of uses within the manufacturing high-tech sector. The energy infrastructure installation and the speed in which that can be done is incredibly important for investment decisions. Delays will cause them to do it someplace else or to reduce the amount of investment. So it's really important we get our timelines right for investing in this infrastructure. And one of the key items here is regulatory certainty. They have to understand what the rules will be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. If they don't understand this, that uncertainty will cause them to go to a place that provides more certainty. So these are the critical components of what's necessary to take advantage of a once in maybe 100-year opportunity that exists now in front of New York State. The next slide, please. What's really critical here is to understand the kind of jobs we're talking about as well. It's the highest paying sector across the spectrum of the jobs it provides. These jobs are blue collar jobs and white collar jobs, all levels of education and opportunity. They also have resiliency. Our companies today are not letting people go. They're just upskilling and redeploying them. They're getting more efficiencies, more opportunities. So these are really great and well-secured long-term jobs. The multiplier effect is one thing that's often not understood about this sector. It's at least a 5x in the jobs and investment space. In most cases, it's 7x. We're looking at in Central New York, for example, 50,000 jobs. That's really the low side. I'm expecting in Central New York and Utica combined 250,000 people to move here, which requires a huge influx of housing needs and all the other infrastructure needs. Central New York is probably one of the strongest growth areas, but you have the same thing going on across the thruway. Up and down the thruway, we work directly with companies like Global Foundries and Micron, and these plans are not an if, it's a question of when and how fast. And speed to delivery is really important. The key elements here are abilities to really give upgraded skills. We work specifically in both the registered apprenticeship space with our friends at Department of Labor. Thank you, Commissioner, as well as SUNY. And so a rapidly expanding opportunity for every company to have apprentices. We offer them as a sponsor for a company who has one apprentice, or we just had 15 junior workers graduate just yesterday at Danfoss, one of the high-tech investments. So the reality is that it's life-changing to watch someone become a journey worker. Quite frankly, those are opportunities for all incomes in New York State. We also run, I think, one of the most advanced pre-apprenticeship programs. We call it Real Life Rosies, Women into Manufacturing. And literally hundreds of women just starting that program are now employed in the manufacturing sector. So that the opportunity here at all levels of both education and skill are amazing in the sectors related to manufacturing. And these are high-tech sectors with great resiliency. I think what I'd like to really leave you with is we have an opportunity to rewrite the history books for New York. But one of the key elements is making sure we get energy right. I believe we'll solve our challenges related to people, both getting people to come from across the globe and across the states to be here. I believe we'll have ample opportunity to upskill and make sure that they are successful. I believe we have enough water to deal with all the needs related to sectors like the semiconductor sector that needs a lot of water. So I believe, and we can get tax policy right. We've already got it right for C corporations on manufacturing. It's one of the reasons why these large companies want to be here. The one area that I'm not concerned about, I mean, I am very concerned about, and the one area that keeps me up at night is energy. So I'll leave you with that.
Very good. Thank you, Randy. And our final presentation comes from Jordan Stutt, the Senior Director of the Northeast Region for CalSTART. CalSTART is a national nonprofit focused on accelerating clean transportation with a membership of firms across the entire transportation sector. So we're grateful for your perspective today, Jordan, as we round out these presentations.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Next slide. Really grateful to be here today. Thank you for the invitation to share some perspectives on what's happening in the transportation space and some of the energy planning that we see as critical to supporting the transition to zero-emission transportation. Thank you for the quick intro on CalSTART. We can skip this slide. I want to start with why we do our work. We know that across the country, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. It is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in New York State. And unlike what we've seen in the electricity sector, where we've seen dramatic reductions in emissions, emissions have been really stubborn in the transportation sector. We're over 30 years out from 1990 levels, and we're still at about the same amount of transportation. So if we're going to address that and meet the state's climate targets, we need to be successful with a two-pronged approach, the first of which is reducing vehicle miles traveled. Thanks to Susan and Paul for their discussion of smart growth and locational efficiency. We really need to make sure that we are giving folks more alternatives to single occupancy vehicle trips. And then we recognize that people are still going to drive individual cars, trucks are still going to deliver goods. We need to do everything that we can to rapidly decarbonize those vehicles. I'm going to focus most of my comments today on what we're seeing in the medium and heavy duty vehicle space, but I do want to make one quick note on the light duty sector. We have new data from the first quarter of 2025, and we saw that despite all of the headwinds from DC, despite the fact that Tesla sales are down in the first quarter, overall EV sales are up 11%. I think that speaks to the growing demand for these vehicles and the growing array of options that are becoming increasingly attractive to consumers. Next slide, please. One of the reasons that we're focused on medium and heavy duty vehicles is because of the opportunity to deliver real impact. Medium and heavy duty vehicles, vans, buses, trucks account for just 1/10 of the vehicles on our roads, but they account for nearly 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions from our roads, and about 1/2 of the nitrogen oxide emissions and particulate matter that are particularly damaging to local health. So there's an outsized opportunity for impact here, and it requires a smaller number of decision makers to make that change. Fleet operators might operate a fleet of 10 vehicles, 20 vehicles, in some cases, thousands of vehicles. So by helping them make this transition, we can really multiply the impact there. Next slide, please. And we know that this is not a transition that is going to happen overnight, nor is it going to happen on the same timeline for each segment of the vehicle population. So we think about this in terms of the beachhead model, where we will see a phased-in approach. So we will begin with the easiest and most cost-effective vehicles to electrify, like transit buses and cargo vans. As more of those vehicles hit the roads, we will develop more manufacturing capacity in the US. We'll be able to build a workforce to help maintain these vehicles. We'll reduce supply chain costs, reduce battery costs. And as we move through that transition, it becomes more cost-effective to electrify the more challenging vehicle segments. So you can see long-haul trucks are at the very end of that graphic. That's not going to be the first segment of vehicles that we electrify. We hear about the challenges there a lot, but we've got some time to address those challenges while we make really major strides elsewhere. Next slide, please. And New York is doing a tremendous amount of work to support this transition. There's a lot to see on this figure. I won't try to parse it all here, but each wedge here represents one state. I've highlighted New York's wedge in purple. Each ring in that graphic represents a different policy category that we're tracking to understand how leading states are preparing for this transition in the medium and heavy duty space. And the short summary here is that outside of California, New York is doing as much as any state to support this transition, to make it cost effective and make it feasible. That's through a combination of factors like implementation of the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, incentives provided through the Truck Voucher Incentive Program, and other planning efforts that are underway. And we're already seeing that New York is ahead of the curve because of that. New York has the 9th most trucks on the road in total, but it has the 4th most zero emission trucks that have already been deployed. Next slide, please. And as we see more and more of those electric trucks hitting the road, we know that there is going to be an increase in energy demand. A couple of years ago, CalSTART partnered with National Grid and some other organizations on the Electric Highways Study, through which we evaluated how much electric capacity is going to be needed along the highways in New York and Massachusetts to meet the needs of electric vehicles and electric trucks. There were some eye-popping results in there, including that by the end of this decade, we might need to see 10 megawatt charging hubs. That's a whole lot of electricity, but since then we've seen some great planning efforts that have kicked off. The proactive planning proceeding by the DPS has gotten a lot of really helpful information from the utilities. National Grid and Con Ed provided really detailed examples of where we know we're going to need to see proactive investment in that infrastructure, even though we haven't received load letters yet. We don't know exactly what that demand is going to look like, but we know we need to start investing in it if we want it to be a cost-effective transition. There are medium and heavy-duty make-ready pilots that are underway to help customers fund the investment in charging infrastructure so that they can build out charging hubs at their depots instead of relying on public charging infrastructure. And NYSERDA is leading a medium and heavy duty grid impact study to get some really robust information about what this change is going to look like for the grid. Next slide, please. This serves as a little bit of preview of what we might expect. We're a few years behind California in this transition, but just in the last couple of weeks for most of these announcements, we've seen some major ribbon cuttings. So these are all in California, mostly Southern California, but we've seen announcements for the FM Harbor for Forum Mobility, where they'll be charging 200 trucks a day. That's a 9 megawatt site. Terrawatt just opened a charging hub that is a 7 megawatt site. Green Lane opened a charging hub that is a 10 megawatt site. This is all in the last quarter. And so while we are not quite at the point where we're seeing these kinds of developments in New York, this is what we know we need to plan for. And all of that work that I cited on the previous slide makes New York really well prepared to handle that. Next slide, please. Akin to the planning that's happening in the energy space, we know that we need to plan out our charging infrastructure in a regional manner with all the other states across the Eastern Seaboard. That is underway. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but National Grid is leading a DOE-funded study to serve Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and New England. We are leading a sister planning project that stretches from New Jersey down to Georgia along I-95. We're already seeing significant funding being allocated to the actual build out of this charging infrastructure. So really excited about the progress there. And finally, on the next slide, just ending with a couple of notes of things that I think can be particularly valuable in this transition to overcome some of the challenges that we're seeing. Next slide, please. I'll start talking through it. We can get to that next slide if there is one in the deck. We really want to address the financing barriers that fleets are facing to getting more electric trucks on the road. One of those issues is the residual value of medium and heavy duty electric trucks. There just haven't been that many sales of used electric trucks yet. So it's hard for financiers to pinpoint exactly what that value will be. But we're working on calculating exactly what those component costs look like, how else those batteries can be recycled and reused, and encouraging states to look into government-backed loan guarantees to mitigate that risk, particularly through green banks. And then in terms of building out the charging infrastructure that we need on the roads, really excited about the opportunities through fleet demand aggregation to pool resources and to make sure that fleets are working together to fund efficient build-out where we know there are strategic locations for that rather than overbuilding, drawing too much demand, requiring too much of our utilities. So excited about that and happy to talk about that more with anybody who's interested. Thanks.
Thank you, Jordan. So I expect there's some questions from the members, and I would say just try to keep them, both the questions and the answers, relatively short, given where we are in the schedule. I've seen my neighbor here. I'm going to start with Jessica Waldorf for the Department of Public Service.
Thank you, and thanks to all the presenters. I think I could ask you each a question, but I won't take up all the time. Jeff, you in your presentation talked a little bit about hybrid electrification with fossil backup, and one of the points that was on your slide is avoided utility infrastructure investment. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so our buildings already have excess electric capacity, especially in winter, because they have cooling. And so my thoughts around hybrid electrification are to electrify to the point of the existing capacity within the building and also within the existing electric service. So, you know, in most apartments, I think you can, if you can put in a window AC, you can also put in a heat pump that can do most of your heating and probably in many cases all of your heating, but we're trying to figure that out now. And we could do some pilots for that.
Great. I was thinking more about avoided natural gas system infrastructure investment, and that definitely is something that we're balancing, right? And, you know, trying to figure out the best way. I think you made some really good points on 100-foot rule.
So that's where delivered fuels also come into play, because potentially, I think as we use gas less, if it's a delivered fuel, it could be ultimately a biofuel, but even if it's fossil, you're not using that much of it. And so we don't necessarily need to maintain the gas grid in that situation.
Great. All right, I'll defer to another colleague.
Jordan, I missed it when you said, when you talked about EV sales, 11% growth in the first quarter. Where was that from? What was that referencing? And is that just, from, is that, from 2024 to 25 or the first quarter of 25 compared to what?
Yeah, that's the first quarter of 2025 total EV sales compared to the first quarter of 2024. And one additional point of context that I think is helpful there is that we did see a much larger growth year to year from 2023 Q1 to 2024 Q1. So if you look at the 2-year transition, it's astronomical. And despite all the challenges we're facing right now, I'm pretty impressed with what was accomplished in this first quarter.
And I guess a bit of a challenge then, or question, given the challenges that we have and the uncertainty at the federal level, do you anticipate or would you expect to see any decline in EV sales, either trucks or passenger vehicles?
I wouldn't expect to see raw decline. I think the rate of the increase might drop, just given the uncertainty that we're seeing there. But frankly, those first quarter numbers are making me more optimistic than I had been a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that yet. Me too. Thank you, Jordan.
Really quick, Jordan, while we're on you, one of the things that was in your slide deck on the hubs, I think is really interesting. The numbers of megawatts sticks out to me as very large numbers. Can you speak a little bit to anything you know about how California in those instances was planning infrastructure investments around those very large power draws?
I can't speak to it in depth, but I can speak to the fact that they have a dedicated EV charging infrastructure incentive program called Energize that makes a big difference in bringing those to life. I can't speak to the other incentives that were compiled there to make those projects happen, but know that they've been in the works for a long time. It's, as everybody here knows, those are long lead time projects.
Great, thank you. And thanks for highlighting proactive planning. I think that's certainly an area, that in coordination with coordinated grid planning is where we need to be thinking about how to coordinate those very large new additions to the power grid. So appreciate it. Thank you.
I guess on that proactive planning, a little bit of a combo question, even though I know the presentations were discrete between Jordan and Randy. How do we take best advantage of New York's manufacturing industry? Great to see that there's the ZEV corridor going up I-95, and to some degree that plays up with states that were earlier adopters into the EV vehicles. What are some other corridors we should be looking at as we're looking at New York-based manufacturers and how they move their shipment to other parts of the country?
You want to start?
Sure. I do think there's a really great opportunity for complementary load between EV charging and manufacturing, just given the time of day where energy is drawn down, and the opportunity to co-locate that with renewables. So excited about that, but can't speak to the location of new manufacturing. I'm sure Randy can speak to that better.
Yeah, much of the new manufacturing is called I'll call the I-90 corridor, and then also 81. You'll see North Country and Southern Tier and Upstate, but also in Westchester County. I mean, some of the you'll see some types of manufacturing. Quite frankly, across all sectors, you're going to see manufacturing growth. Yeah, semiconductor sort of is a lead indicator. It's one of the reasons why so many people committed once Micron decided to come. Like, we want to be where Micron or that industry is going to be as well. So the truth of the matter is, those opportunities will range across the sectors. Obviously, battery technology will continue to improve. We've got a tech hub related to that. Also in New York State, I think that'll be a part of the green revolution that's transpiring. I think what's people don't sort of fully understand is just how much energy these mega facilities use. And I think that, much like you heard some of the sort of the eye-popping numbers around charging stations, you just have a huge need for energy load and then continuous energy load. I think that's what's transformed and changed in the energy outlook for the future. And I think we just need to be smart about how we now proceed given the energy loads, and we want that energy load to be as green as possible and both reliable as possible for the longest term.
I just want to follow up a little bit on this. Randy, what other kinds of industry besides obviously something like Micron should we be looking at in New York? I mean, obviously, we hear about data centers. That's, enormous amount of energy being used. Is there other directions that, Chobani is a great, agribusiness but are there other places and other types of businesses that we should be looking at for manufacturing?
Oh, actually, across the high-tech sector. The reality is I'm not a big fan of data centers. Not many jobs and a lot of energy. So I would actually would recommend not doing data centers because of energy is a precious commodity now. So we have to be very careful that we don't only do a certain amount of those kinds of investment. Obviously, some of those places and spaces are necessary for AI development. I understand that kind of investment that drives the overall economic investment. But nearly every manufacturing high-tech sector we could be competitive for now. It's biotech. We're seeing Lotte make hundreds of millions of dollars of investment and in gaining some new products. So literally, if you look at modern manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, clean jobs with great skills and longevity, there's not a sector we can't compete in. I think the ones that we have to be particularly concerned about and really focus on are some of the key metal sectors. We need copper. Copper is a huge need for the greener economy. We have a producer and a provider, Revere. So Upstate has both aluminum, steel, and copper. All those are necessary for the long-term vitality too. So I think we'll have to take a hard look at how we do some of those particular sectors. But the whole spectrum of where people want to build the high-tech sectors has just flipped. It went from low-cost countries to actually high-tech countries, excuse me. We have the infrastructure on the talent side also. So we really have all the building blocks to do many sectors across, and they all converge. It's not like, scientists only want to work in semiconductors. They converge across the spectrum, but there are at least a dozen tech sectors that we can be competitive in now that I would not have said that 10 years ago.
One other question, taking Jackie's question and giving it to Lori. Lori, what's the issue that keeps you up at night, given the people you're working with and the changes that you've seen? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's just the stability. Our demographic are some of the most vulnerable older adults, people with disabilities, domestic violence survivors. And so for us, again, it's, I can't even tell people who call us to stay calm. We stay focused. And so it's looking at all the programs we have, just doing our best, where we need to. We go to the department, we, file complaints where we need to, we, do fair hearings to try to help people. I think as a state, though, I feel like we just need to shore up the programs we have and then just look forward and be ready for the uncertain.
I'm wondering, Randy, are there programs in other states that you wish we would replicate here? I don't know which slide it was of yours, but the sort of discussion of the energy infrastructure and that either helping attract manufacturers or being a deterrent in terms of logistical challenges has been one we've talked about a lot in the interagency space over the last 6 months. But are there programs other places that you wish we were, cribbing here?
Actually, most states are grappling with how to get enough energy.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we have to understand is that the infrastructure doesn't exist. If you want to get the materials to do your transmission and distribution system, transformers now to order 4 or 5 years. No one can wait that long. So we ought to get in the business of figuring out how we make them in our state. And I'm talking about all kinds of technology that has to be made, and let's do it here. We have the technology to do it and the opportunity to do it, but everyone's waiting for the infrastructure. And if we get ahead of the game, it's all competitiveness. If we can do it before Pennsylvania can do it, we can win. So I think we just need to think through how we get ahead of the curve. And the timelines are much more compressed. Realistically, these are things we probably should have done 5 years ago. We didn't know we needed to do it maybe 5 years ago, but now we do. And I think the other thing we need to do is get speed to delivery for these projects. Otherwise, if they can find a place, even if it's a little bit more expensive, they can do it quicker, we could lose out. So I do think most states are really grappling with this. The good news is if you go to Arizona, you also have to worry about water, right? So we can get ahead if we can solve the energy question. But we have to be smart about it. And I think what's really changed is people's understanding of what energy can be and what is. We were very flat. Usage on energy was flat for a long, long time. Now it's not just an incremental, it's exponential. That's a different landscape. As Yogi Berra said, the future ain't what it used to be. It's just really different. And I think that's what we got to get our heads around in New York State and realize everybody else is trying to do the same thing. We got to get out front of it. But I wish I could say, look at this state that's doing it. A lot of states aren't figuring it out. I think many of them have started, a lot of good examples of how to get greener energy, but reliability, sustainability, growth, we need to really solve those problems.
Yeah, thanks. Same question on the multifamily housing front for both of you. Other states, what they're doing, what you wish we were, stealing from them.
Well, I'll say in California, they have heavily subsidized the electrification of buildings, right? I mean, it's come down a little bit more recently, but they've because they recognize that they don't want cost increase for residents and the landlords can't take on more costs. So we see electrification projects where they're like 80-90% subsidized. Now, I recognize that there's budget constraints here as well. But as far as getting things to happen in low-income housing, that's the best way to do it.
I agree. I mean, I think bottom line is we've got to figure out how to solve the underlying economic challenge here, which is people don't spend $20,000 a unit to save 500. So we're going to have to scale up, at least in the short term, until we can make other changes in the market and the supply chains catch up and things get better. We're going to have to try to figure out how we really solve that problem. Other states are starting to think about it. I would also just say on the proactive grid planning, which is super important, it's also really important on the building side, not just the transport side. Remember, what we're talking about on the building side is we have an enormous load pocket in the commercial real estate industry in Manhattan, south of 59th Street, and we're going to have to figure out how we increase the local distribution infrastructure to account for all of that additional load, and it's going to have to be done proactively. It can't be done just reactively when every building starts filing a load letter.
Real quick, I wanted to add the nice thing about growth, it provides new revenues. All kinds of new revenues could be available with growth in the investment by these sectors. So one of the big challenges is how do you get to the end goal? Well, you have to have revenues. You have to have subsidies. Well, we grow that through our economic growth. Now we have availability. So I think that's one of the things that can, on the bright side of being so attractive, we can get it right, revenues grow, more investment in a quicker transitions.
That's a great point.
Any final questions from the members? Well, I'll just observe that from my perspective, having obviously undertaken a bit of a similar effort through the Climate Action Council's work, which many of you were involved in, I think the topic of load is one that has shifted quite significantly, even in those numbers of years in which we knew we were planning for electrification. To your point, Zach, there's different types of electrification and there's different challenges associated with its physical location. But in this case, the loads that Randy is talking about are additive to the planning that we already were doing. And I do believe that it requires a different solution set in most cases, given the scale and sort of intensity, if you will, of that load from a geographic perspective as well. So I think this was extremely timely. I want to thank each of you for offering your perspectives as we begin to draft these critical chapters of the energy plan. And thank you to the members for the fantastic questions as well. Next slide, please. I'll ask if the members have any other business to bring before the board. Okay, hearing none, I will move to close the meeting. I do want to thank all board members and their delegates for coming to this meeting for your participation today. Be on the lookout for a near-term meeting to continue our progress on the draft state energy plan. And for the members of the public who observe this meeting here in Albany and via the webcast, thank you as well. Please do visit our website to sign up for ongoing email updates. And with that, this meeting of the State Energy Planning Board is hereby adjourned. Thank you all.